This is a picture of me when I was a little kid, and I do not remember when this picture was taken because I was way too young. You can see I was a very nice-looking child, but I had all of the full-blown symptoms of autism, no language. And Mother got very concerned when she saw that my behavior was not the same as the little girl next door, and I was her first child. And back then, they used to say, well, autistic kids were just going to have to go to an institution. And the way that Mother figured out that she could get through to me, and that she could actually work with me, is she was playing Bach on the piano, and she heard me humming the Bach. And when she heard me humming the Bach, she knew she'd be able to get through to me. Well, this is a picture of me when I'm a little bit older. And you can see by the look of the dress that I'm a child of the 50s. And being a child of the 50s was actually a good thing, because life in the 50s was much more structured, with structured meals. And this structure, that was just the structure of society, was actually really a good thing for me. There was also really good, clear-cut values of right and wrong in the 50s. I have one other thing I'd like to discuss, and that is differentiating behavior that is just bad behavior on the part of the child and behavior that is caused by the disability. This is a question I often get asked from parents. Now, if the child screams in the supermarket, that's due to the disability, because they're just overstimulated from all the fluorescent lights and all the noise and all the smells. Scratchy clothes, I couldn't tolerate scratchy clothes. I had poor handwriting. A lot of kids are hyper around fluorescent lights. And when the school bell went off, that hurt my ears and I would scream. Those are problems that are due to autism or Asperger's. But on the other hand, sometimes a kid is just naughty. And I knew I could not get away with being naughty in school, because if I was naughty in school, the teacher told Mother, and I knew that there'd be no Howdy Doody show that night. Well, some examples of behavior that are just bad behavior, that are not part of the disability, are rudeness, bad table manners, being a slob, swearing, laughing at a fat lady. These are just things that are just plain bad behavior, and they should not be tolerated in an autistic child. This is a picture of me when I'm probably about 5th or 6th grade, and elementary school went pretty well. I was in a small school with structured small classes taught in the old-fashioned way. I would have had a big problem today in a big chaotic classroom if I hadn't had an aide. And then when I got into teenagerhood, I had a terrible time in high school. Kids teased me. High school was some of the worst part of my life. Well, this is the famous picture of me in the cattle squeeze chute out on my aunt's ranch in Arizona. And when I got into puberty, I started having horrible, horrible anxiety attacks. It was like a constant state of stage fright all the time. People will ask me, well, what was it like? And I'll tell the teachers, just imagine what it was like when you took your licensing exams. Now, just imagine if you had those kind of anxiety all the time. Well, that's the way it was with me. I was desperate for relief. Well, I was out at my aunt's ranch, and the next-door neighbors were working some cattle. And I noticed that when the cattle were put in the squeeze chute, that some of the animals would just relax. So I went out and I tried the squeeze chute, and I found out the pressure was calming. But this anxiety was very debilitating. And when I got older, in my 20s, it got worse and worse and worse and worse. And finally, when I was in my early 30s, I started taking antidepressant medication. And I can tell you right now, I would not be here without antidepressant medication. And this summer, I got to see Donna Williams down in Australia. And she has very, very serious sensory problems. She partially controlled these problems with a casein and gluten-free diet. And now she's taking just a 0.5 milligram of Risperdal. That's only a 0.5 milligram. That's helped her very, very much with her problems with sensory oversensitivity. And remember, it's only a 0.5 milligram a day, a very, very tiny dose. That's all that she should be taking, and that's what works. Okay, now we get into the pictures I really like to talk about, and that's cattle. I just get totally relaxed when I'm around cattle. And if you lay on the ground, they'll just come right up to you. And people will say to me, well, aren't you worried about them stepping on you? Well, as long as they're in a big enough pen so that they don't get scared and maybe spook, you don't have to worry about them stepping on you. All they're going to do is come up and they're going to lick you to death. That's what they're going to do. But I just feel very calm and peaceful when I'm around cattle. This is a picture of me at one of the meatpacking plants, and I'm demonstrating how to move cattle by just moving them with a stick with a plastic streamer on the end. I've done a lot of work with the cattle industry on improving how animals are handled, and people need to learn, well, you don't need to have all these electric prods. But one of the things you've got to do is you've got to get rid of the things in the facility that cattle are afraid of, like a little chain hanging down or it's too dark. They're not scared of getting slaughtered. They're scared of things like it's too dark, or there's a bright reflection on the floor, or there's a little piece of chain that hangs down and scares them. And if you remove those things, then they're going to no longer be scared. Now, this picture shows a curved alleyway in a handling system I designed for John Wayne's Red River Feed Yard back in the late 70s. This was one of my early projects. You can see the person just bringing a whole big group of cattle up around the curve, and you might wonder, why make it curved? Well, the reason for making it curved is so that the cattle think they're going back to where they came from. Cattle always want to go back to where they came from. Also, the curved alley prevents them from seeing people up ahead. The thing is, you want to work with the animal's behavior, not against the animal's behavior. And this other aerial view, this yellow facility, this is just an aerial view of a cattle handling facility I designed for a large feed yard. And I call it the almighty snake. It's got two curves, and the cattle just keep going around and around the curves, and they keep thinking that they're going back to where they came from, and they'll flow through that really easily. At Colorado State University, I teach a class in designing of cattle handling facilities. And in this picture, you can see the layout of the yellow cattle handling facility you just saw in the previous slide. And you can see it's three curves laid out along a line. And I demonstrate to the students how to do this. We also talk about cattle behavior, things that scare cattle, flight zone, point of balance. Another really important thing that I explain about livestock and about all animals is fear memories. You can get an animal that gets scared of something like maybe black hats. You might be scared of black hats because somebody abused them that had a black hat. And that's visual thinking. But it's really important with animals that their first experience with something new be a good first experience. This is kind of a funny picture. I'm pulling on Oliver Sacks's beard. And I've known Oliver Sacks since 1994 when he wrote the chapter on me in Anthropologist on Mars. Oliver's really a great guy. People ask me all the time, what's Oliver like? And I said, well, he's just like a really kindly professor kind of a person. He's really nice. And it has to be really nice if he's going to let me pull on his beard. Well, here I am in my really, really messy office. And you might be wondering, why do I have all my business cards up on the wall? Well, because I have to see things all at once, like a visual display. I have problems with sequential thinking. Like if I go to a gas station and ask for directions, if I don't write it down, I don't remember all the turns. And I put the cards up there because if I don't have them up there, it's like they're not there. It needs to be out there where I can visually see it. And it's my visual thinking that makes me put the cards up there. I mean, I just would hate one of those Palm Pilot things because you can't see the data in it. That's the last thing that I would want. And after all, you know, a neat desk is a sign of a sick mind and somebody that's just not very busy. Well, I have always admired Albert Einstein. In fact, when Einstein was 3, he had a lot of autistic traits. He had no speech until age 3. He was a visual thinker. The thing is autism is a continuum from normal to abnormal. You know, when does computer nerd turn into Asperger's? There's no black and white dividing line. And one of the things that concerns me today is what if you had a little kid of 3 years old named Albert today, and he got into the special ed system, what would happen to him? Would he become a great physicist? I get worried about that. And that gets back to the whole thing of developing people's talents, taking that talent and developing it into something that can make you employable. And one of the things that really helped me when I was in high school was a fantastic mentor science teacher. And I get asked, well, how do you find mentors to help these kids? Well, they can be your next door neighbor. You never know where you're going to find them. You know, I've talked to parents all the time where a mentor that could teach a child computer programming would be just great. I can't emphasize enough. We've got to develop the the talent areas. Well, in this picture, I got about 20 years worth of convention badges. And I put all the convention badges up and hats up, and I can then look at that and I can see all the places I've been. Why is it important for me to collect convention badges? Well, it gives me a real sense of having been to different places, to have all these badges of all the different places that I've gone to. I also have a lot of badges from a lot of different meatpacking plants too, and I have those just along, one wall. But it gives me a concrete a sense of I have done something. Now, this is just a picture of me in the squeeze machine, and I can control the squeeze machine, control the precise amount of pressure. And as I said before, when I got into puberty, I started having these horrible anxiety attacks. Pressure from the squeeze machine helped to calm me down and helped to reduce the anxiety attacks. Little kids with autism will often be calmed down by pressure. When I was little, I used to get under the sofa cushions and get other people to sit on top of the sofa cushions to make pressure. Another thing that the squeezing machine does is it kind of gives me that nice feeling of being held. And I think it's very important for young kids to get that feeling of being held, because if you don't get that feeling of being held, then you're not going to have nice feelings. I find that I have nicer dreams, after I've used the squeeze machine. In order to have nice feelings, you sort of have to feel that nice, comforting feeling of being held. And it's just so important to get these little kids desensitized when they're really young so that they'll enjoy being held. This is just a close-up of me in the squeeze machine, and you can see how relaxed that I've gotten. Sort of just have to just give in to the pressure. Then it's sort of like floating. I can get to the point where it seems like all that's left is just my head outside the machine, and the rest of me is just sort of floating, totally calm and relaxed. Now this is just another front view of in the squeeze machine. There really isn't too much to say about this picture. I do have the drawings for the squeeze machine available. If you go to google.com and type in squeeze machine, you should be able to find the drawings, or you could write to me and I could send you the drawings. Well, this is a picture I really, really like. I'm out there with some cattle, and he's just kissing me, giving me some big slobbery cow kisses. And I have to say I really enjoy that. I just feel very calm when I'm around the cattle. And I always have people saying, aren't you worried about these big animals that are going to hurt you? Well, the thing is, you have to make sure that they voluntarily come up to you. And you're in a big enough pen, so if they got scared and spooked, they wouldn't be stepping on you. Another warning is, do not do this with bulls.